Welcome back. We love digging into complex topics, and you've sent us some really interesting material on the Black Dragons gang.
Yes, a fascinating case study,
Yeah,
really.
exactly. So, our mission today is to basically unpack all this information, pull out the most important uh, bits about this Chinese American criminal group.
Focusing on their main run, roughly 1980 to 2003, right? Though there are mentions of some activity later on.
Right, 2020 to 2024, reportedly. And they started out in Lincoln Heights, Los Angeles, and Lodi, California.
hmm But their operations really centered around the San Gabriel Valley, Lodi, and Stockton.
Okay, so let's dive right in. Where did it all begin?
Well, the sources point to 1980, Lincoln Heights. And it's interesting, the initial impulse wasn't necessarily crime, per se.
What was it then?
It seems it was more about self-protection. You had these young Chinese immigrants banding together
Protection from who or what?
from other gangs, basically, other
Yeah.
established Asian groups
Mhm.
and Latino gangs operating in the area. It was about safety in numbers initially.
Yeah. Right, okay. So that makes sense, a sort of defensive origin. But obviously it didn't stay that way.
No, definitely not. I mean, considering how things developed later. But that initial need for security, it might have sort of laid the groundwork.
Yeah, you can see how that might morph. So they grew from there.
They did. The information suggests they hit over 100 core members at their peak, which is, pretty substantial for a street gang.
And they weren't just Chinese members, were they?
No, that's another interesting point. They were multi-ethnic, Chinese, Vietnamese, Latino members too.
That does seem unusual for the time, maybe. How do you think that mix affected them?
Well, it probably broadened their reach, wouldn't you think? Access to different networks, maybe different territories or types of criminal enterprise.
Could be different skills, different connections, maybe?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they use the color black, apparently, for identification. Pretty standard gang identifier, that.
Okay, so formed for protection, grew, became diverse. Let's get to the criminal side. What were they actually doing?
Right. Well, the sources lay out quite a wide range of activities. It seems useful to separate the organized crime from the street-level stuff.
Okay. What falls under organized crime?
Things like extortion, and the sources specifically mention targeting brothels, prostitution itself, money laundering,
Which follows from illegal income, yeah.
narcotics distribution, and even counterfeiting.
Counterfeiting. Oh, wow, okay. That feels, I don't know, a step above typical street gang activities. Requires more organization, right?
Absolutely. It implies planning, connections, probably some kind of hierarchy. That's definitely pushing into more sophisticated organized crime.
So that's one side. What about the street level crime?
That was, well, pretty brutal by the sounds of it. Murder, robbery, home invasions, car theft, assault, um, arms trafficking, illegal gambling.
So a really violent presence on the streets as well.
Yeah, it paints a picture of a group involved at multiple levels of the criminal underworld, not just one or the other.
And that seems to be a key point in the material, this involvement in both organized and street crime. That made them stand out.
It did, yeah. Compared to maybe other Asian crime groups at the time, it
Yeah.
suggests they were, I don't know, adaptable, or maybe just very ambitious.
How so?
Well, the organized stuff likely brought in the serious money, funded things, built infrastructure.
Hmm.
But the street violence, that builds reputation, controls territory, intimidates rivals.
And maybe the community itself.
Exactly. And that's another really disturbing point highlighted in the sources. They apparently preyed on Asian American communities for income.
How? Like, the extortion wasn't just external.
Right? Extortion, illegal gambling operations within the community. It wasn't just about outsiders. They were exploiting vulnerabilities close to home.
That adds a whole other layer, doesn't it? Okay, so complex operations. What about their network? Allies and enemies?
They seemed pretty well connected, according to the sources.
Hmm.
Allies included some pretty significant names.
Like who?
Watching, Vietnamese Boys Gang,
Yeah.
Oriental Lazy Boys, Asian Boys, Hop Sing Tong, Bamboo Union. Even the 14K triad is mentioned.
Wow, that's quite a list. From street gangs right up to, well, major international triads like the 14K and Bamboo Union.
It suggests they knew how to navigate that world, build those relationships across different levels. These alliances mean support, resources, reach.
And enemies. Was there a main rival?
The main rival mentioned is the Tiny Rascals. So typical gang conflict, presumably over territory or illicit markets.
But the connections weren't just formal group alliances, were they? There were some really specific personal ties mentioned.
Oh, absolutely. That's where it gets really intricate.
Yeah.
Like one Black Dragon member was also reportedly in the Hop Sing Tong.
Okay.
And gets to the current leader of the Bamboo Union, Wang Shaoxin, Yao Yao. He was apparently this guy's godfather.
His godfather.
Yeah.
Seriously.
That kind of personal link at that level, I mean, it shows how blurred the lines could be.
Definitely. It's not just gangs. It's almost like family trees within the underworld.
Sort of, yeah. And there are mentions of family ties with the Asian boys gang, too, and just general relations with the Vietnamese boys and Hoa Cheng. It's complex.
So this web of connections, this range of activity, they must have been pretty influential for a while.
They were, particularly in the San Gabriel Valley during the mid-90s, it seems. But that level of activity, especially the violence, it attracts attention.
Federal attention, right.
Exactly. The FBI opened a case in 1999. It turned into a big 3-year investigation called Operation Backdoor.
Operation Backdoor. Sounds like they were trying to get inside the organization. What were they targeting?
The big stuff. Murder, attempted murder, armed robbery, extortion, illegal firearms, and ICO violations.
Ah, IRCO. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. That's the Fed's big tool for dismantling organized crime.
Precisely. And it seems Backdoor was effective. It led to a huge gang sweep in 2002.
How big?
They arrested 30 core members all at once. That's a major blow.
Absolutely cripples an organization taking out that many key people.
And the convictions followed. In 2003, over half of those arrested were convicted. The top 3 leaders got hit with 24-year sentences each.
24 years. That effectively ended their reign then.
Largely, yes. Taking out the leadership like that is often devastating. And there's a quote in there from FBI agent Kerry Smith.
Yeah. What did he say?
He headed the unit focused on Asian criminal enterprises, and he basically said these guys weren't afraid to commit violence.
Stark. Really sums up their reputation, I guess.
It does. That level of violence probably helped them dominate for a while, but it also painted a huge target on their backs. It's often a double-edged sword.
So after that 2000-2003 takedown, what happened? Did they just disappear?
The information suggests a long period of, well, inactivity from about 2003 right up until 2020. They basically went quiet.
But then there was that mention of a possible return.
Yeah, a reported brief resurgence between 2020 and 2024. The details are sparse, but it's not totally unheard of for gangs to try and reform.
Maybe younger members trying to use the old name.
Could be. Or changing circumstances, creating an opportunity. But there's another really interesting wrinkle from the period after the initial downfall.
What's that?
Something that happened in prison. The sources mentioned that some of the convicted core members actually united with members of former rival Asian gangs.
United, like teamed up with rivals.
Yeah, and apparently made peace, found common ground behind bars.
Wow. Okay, that is unexpected. Why would they do that? Survival in prison.
That's likely a big part of it, yeah. Prison politics often creates strange bedfellows. Safety in numbers, shared experiences, maybe realizing the cost of the old ways.
Could it have implications outside prison?
Potentially. Even if the Black Dragons themselves didn't fully come back, those new alliances formed inside could reshape things on the outside later on. It's a fascinating dynamic.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. We started with a group forming for self-defense.
Chinese immigrants in Lincoln Heights.
Which then grew into this multi-ethnic gang over 100 members strong.
Involved in a really wide spectrum of crime. From, sophisticated stuff like counterfeiting and money laundering.
Right down to brutal street violence, murder, robbery, the works. And disturbingly, often targeting their own communities.
Yeah. They built this complex network of allies, including major players, had a key rivalry with the tiny rascals.
And these deep, personal, almost family-like connections linking individuals across different groups.
Until their violence drew major federal heat, leading to Operation Backdoor.
The big sweep in 2002, the REO convictions, long sentences for the leaders in 2003.
Followed by years of inactivity, a possible brief return later, and this surprising twist of making peace with rivals in prison.
It's quite a story. From defense to dominance to downfall, and then these strange echoes afterwards.
Definitely. A really compelling, though grim, look at gang dynamics, organized crime, and how law enforcement responds.
Which brings us to a final thought, maybe for everyone listening. Thinking about the Black Dragon's whole arc, what factors really drive the rise and, I guess, the eventual fall of groups like this?
Good question.
And what does this specific deep dive tell us about, the long-term impact on the communities they operated in, and maybe how effective different strategies are for tackling organized crime? Something to chew on.
For sure. Lots to consider there.
Well, thanks for digging into this with us today. It's been quite the exploration.